I've had several small jobs. It is that kind of job market we live in, and I've been blessed with several talents. No one talent is big enough for me to have a single stable job, but I can't complain. Being a freelancer can make your life interesting in ways you never even considered. I have a lot of audio and video equipment. I can record small jingles. I can do voiceovers. I'm a wedding photographer, pretty much an all-round guy that is useful to keep around. My schedule is usually pretty full, and I can afford most things I want and need. It's been a good career. Of course, there are customers that make me question it, and lately, I've run into a customer that made me reconsider my entire profession. Let me tell you about them. It started in early August. I was contacted through a gig site by someone claiming to be a YouTuber focused on abandoned buildings and urban exploring. They wanted a series of long exposure shots, you know, the type where it looks like the sky changes colour in a few seconds instead of hours, or where cars are speeding by at an amazing speed. That kind of shot. I've done a few before. They're pretty easy. Most cameras have a setting to do it automatically. The trick is to make sure you're nearby so nothing messes with the camera, or steals it. Luckily, since these were abandoned buildings, I figured I could just chill nearby and listen to an audiobook. Still, it is a few hours of work. The customer was eager to pay. A bit too eager, perhaps. I was given the address of the first building. It was an old gas station outside of town, next to an abandoned bus stop. I'd passed by it a few times and didn't think much of it. It just seemed like the kind of place that every town had. A place just forgotten by time. I scouted the area and set up my camera in a way that I couldn't see the road. This way, we got a great shot of the sky without blinking lights or cars. Great weather, if a bit windy. Still, I took a few drone shots just as a bonus. It is important to make a good first impression, so they come back later on. Key strategy to being a successful freelancer: make connections whenever you can. I set up my camera, double-checked the settings and battery, and just waited. I rolled out a blanket and put in my headphones. I'd be there for a few hours. The entire thing wasn't that eventful. I listened to my audiobook, packed up the camera, and went back home. No big deal. Then, I went through the footage. At first, it wasn't anything strange. The sky changed a darker blue, and the building went black as time passed. It was just like the customer wanted. If anything, I thought it might be a bit too dark. I thought about what settings to change. Then, in one of the back rooms, a light came on out of nowhere. There was a shadow in the building. It just stood there in what used to be the storage, looking out the window. It was almost completely still. The light was on for at least 2 hours, and I never even noticed. In all that time, the shadow just remained there, perfectly still. Then, the light went out. It was so still that I didn't even know what it was. It looked humanoid, but it was too still to be a living thing. I concluded that it was probably something left in the storage. It was pretty short. A few days later, after sending the footage in, I was paid to do a second shot, this time of an old water tower. I was a bit weirded out by the first shot, but I figured it was just my mind playing tricks, so I did the same thing a second time. I waited for a day with clear weather and set out with all of my equipment. The water tower wasn't that strange. It wasn't even that old, maybe from the 70s. There used to be a billboard on it and a big light to make sure you could see it at all hours of the night. Nowadays, it was just dark and breaking at the seams. It looked dangerous, like you could easily fall off. So I set up my equipment, I put out my blanket, and I waited. Still, I couldn't focus on the audiobook. There was something about the shadow in the last footage that bothered me. Instead, I paced back and forth, looking at the water tower. Why did they even want this footage? This wasn't some hidden mysterious building. This was out in the open. and probably not long for this world. Most of the older buildings were being demolished by spring. The sky turned dark blue. Night snuck up on me. After about 1.5 hours, it was completely dark. Then, the light on the water tower turned on. That wasn't supposed to happen. That light must have been broken for years. Still, it turned on, all by itself. And right there was a shadow. This time it was much clearer. It was humanoid. 2 arms, 2 legs, a torso, a head. It was completely black, like ink. I was standing well over 80 feet away, but I could still see the silhouette clearly. It was again pretty short. What bothered me was that there was no movement. It just stood there, still as a rock. Minutes passed, and the thing just stood there. Still, I had this feeling that I didn't want it to see me. It was like watching a lion. There was inherent danger in it. It had come from nowhere, for an unknown reason, and now it just watched and waited. Did it know I was there? After 45 minutes, the lights went out. I almost forgot about the footage, but I let it go for another half an hour before I packed it all up. I sent the footage in, and I immediately got a response. They wanted another shot, this time of an old quarry not too far from here. They offered me good money for it, but that response time was suspicious. Were they just sitting there, waiting for me to send the footage? How eager were they? I told them about the shadow in the video, but they didn't acknowledge it. This was the biggest red flag for me up until that point. I considered not accepting this contract and told them I wanted to sleep on it. No more than 2 minutes passed before I got another response. We'll pay double. Now, this is where one or the other will call me stupid. But if someone is this eager to make me do something I'm uncomfortable with, it is probably for a good reason. So I refused. It felt good to walk away. I didn't trust them, and I didn't care about the money at that point. Instead, I did what I had to for me to feel safe. I double-checked the handgun I got from my dad. I double-checked my locks, and logged out for the night. But they weren't taking this lying down. The next day, I got a message about 2 payments being frozen. My payment for the first 2 contracts. This was ridiculous. I'd done what they asked. They couldn't just choose not to pay for it. Still, my rent was coming up, and I counted on this payment. I had a bit saved up, but this was throwing a lot of wrenches into my planning. Still, seeing the 20 missed messages from them didn't exactly make me feel better about it. I didn't trust them. Not even a little. I decided to ignore them. I blocked them, and I told them I'd take them to court. I don't submit to blackmail. Instead, I'd use my savings. I was so happy with myself for not just caving to that pressure. If I'd been 10 years younger, I absolutely would have. The following night, as I slept, I had to get up to use the bathroom. I'd drunk a lot of water before going to bed, and I was just twisting and turning. You know the feeling, when you're comfortable and just can't get up, when everything outside the bed feels like ice. So I got up. My apartment was completely dark, but I can get there even with my eyes closed. I just stumbled out, did my business, and washed my hands. As I was about to open the bathroom door, I noticed the hallway light was on. I never turned it on. I had my hand on the door handle, edging it open. There was something out there. I couldn't see it, but I felt it. That same feeling of hiding from a predator tingled up my spine, and I held my breath. 10 minutes passed, then the light just turned off. I didn't even notice how scared I was. My pulse had been hammering in my ears. I was so relieved I cried, and I didn't even understand why. I immediately sent a message to the customer, asking them what was going on. I just sat there, shaking in my underwear, rewriting my message 4 times over as my fingers kept slipping. I asked them specifically about the shadow and what they'd really asked me to film. This time, I didn't get an instant answer. I left my computer on, and the sound turned up so I could hear it as soon as I got a response. I tried going back to sleep, but I kept looking at the hallway. I curled up in bed and just stared at the screen. I was wide awake, adrenaline still rushing through my head. After about 20 minutes, as my eyelids were starting to grow heavy, a response popped up. I crawled out of bed and checked it. Take my picture. That's all it said. It was from the customer. It was legitimate. A minute later, another message. Take my picture. Another message. Another. 2 more. 10. Soon the message sound was having trouble keeping up. I turned off my computer, only to hear my phone start ringing. I got up, stepped over to my phone and turned it off. Then, the light turned on. Silence. I froze, like a deer in headlights. I didn't turn around. I knew it was there, right behind me. There was an awful ripping noise as my wallpaper was torn. Letter by letter, the message appeared in front of me, literally written on the wall. Take my picture. My phone turned itself on. It buzzed with hundreds of missed calls. It switched to the camera app. I just stood there, trying to breathe. My heart was pounding out of my chest. In a sudden motion, the wallpaper ripped itself off and rolled up, simultaneously on every wall of the room. Paintings fell off the walls. Posters curled themselves up. There was an awful shrieking noise, and I fell to the floor, clutching my head. The room was empty. Or at least, it looked that way. Except for a pair of blue footprints on the middle of the carpet. I picked up my phone and aimed the camera at the centre of the room. I'd take their picture, if it meant they'd leave me alone. I forced a breath into my lungs and clicked the button. There was a flash, a voice, somewhere in the blink of an eye, a smile, a summer dress with yellow flowers, brown hair, wet from playing in the rain. Blood. A cracked skull. But the image was empty. I only got one last piece of correspondence from my customer. They eventually paid me too. She loved those places, it said. All she wanted was for us to look. We usually did, except for that one time. She'd played there 100 times. To hell with it. I'm not taking any more pictures. Just be careful what you agree to. That's all I want to say.